No, can you hear me now? Because I had on a headset. And I see your mic is muted. Hello? Can you unmute McDonald?
Hi.
Hi, McDonald. I can hear you now, but I was trying to tell you your mic was muted. I took off the headset. So I don't know what happened to the other ladies, but we can start. It's 6:33. And I know we basically, if there were, I want to make sure we finish chapter 8, which would have been dealing with the digital documents. So, but before I get into that, Annie, I've looked over all the papers. I've pretty much graded them to just hand back so that we can, we'll have those to refer to. Now, the last exercises, which related to the technology, and even the one with the life cycle, some persons, they could have added some more information to it. So that's, I'll email the comments on the document.
Hi, Renee.
Hello? Yes, you could hear me now, right? McDonald. Hello? Can you hear me? I'm speaking clear. I heard you. McDonald, can you hear me? No. No. No, it's not. McDonald, you're not coming through at all. Okay, I'm gonna start with the chapter 8 on digital documents. So digital documents basically talked about the fact that in addition to paper records, we have paper-based record keeping, and digital has emerged as an option that is used for creating documents, working through workflows and business processes with documents that have never even existed in paper format, documents that are what we call born digital. So in this chapter, it's important to be able to define what is a digital document. It's also important to be able to identify some types of digital documents, okay, and give the benefits of using the digital documents versus the traditional paper-based documents, okay? When we're using digital documents, it's even more important to ensure classification is in place. So there should be some form of indexing being done to retrieve the documents eventually. File plans are very important for digital document in order to outline their categorization schemes, and also to be able to provide that security around the document based on how it's classified. Okay, we have different parameters and values that may be involved to ensure that the documents are indexed properly. Okay. There's categorization basically for digital documents can be automatically done utilizing software. There's also the importance of being able to manage those documents. So you would find with digital documents, there's also document management systems in place that help with allowing that to be a part of the business workflow process. Okay. There's also the need for, at the end of the day, some type of a records management application so that once the documents are what we would call declared as records, they can then be placed in the repository and protected and managed in accordance with the established retention timeframes, any type of controls around who has access to the information, and also in terms of the specific requirements, if it's a vital record, ensuring that it's known to your business continuity team to be engaged in, to be protected properly in the event something should happen. Okay, so it seems we're having a technical challenge again. I am able to, my mic is on, but I don't know why you can't hear me, McDonald.
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Because I see your mic seems to be functioning properly.
Yeah.
So I just started. I don't know what's going on with the other ladies. I don't see anyone else. And this is basically the last session we'll be going through.
I wonder if they realized tonight is a makeup class.
Can you post that for me, please?
Okay.
And once you post it, but in terms of were you able to hear me in regard to the assignments?
I didn't hear that part at all.
Oh, okay. So I was basically explaining that I have already marked them up and put the comments on it. So
okay,
these will be returned so that they can be utilized for the exam information. And basically the first one, in terms of describing the records management scenario, persons included what was a part of their scenario, meaning the details on how they processed information. So some things that could have been answered as well would have been whether the company has established a formal program. You know, you could have said that. You could have talked about if there's in terms of the setup of the company, whether you have a designated person for records management. You could have mentioned stuff like your vision or mission statement. If you have, in terms of your organizational chart, your policies and procedures where they're documented. Okay, if you have a website, company website. Okay, and basically in terms of your crew, people who are involved in making decisions that impact records management and its policies, you know, but that scenario basically can tie into a discussion on what is records management.
Okay.
Okay, and the exercise with the life cycle, everyone gave pretty much their first and second stages, the different stages of the records management life cycle, and pretty much added a bit more details in some instances on what is a record and the file plan and inventory and how they contribute to managing the life cycle of the record. Okay, and basically the one about the technology, yes, was basically to explain technology and its use in records management, and basically to give some examples of how technology is used in the field. So you would have seen instances where they mentioned the two basics in the book where they talked about the digital and the microfilm, which more photographic. And you could have probably talked about some specifics where you have, there's document management software, which is different from an application for records management software. And then you have other technologies that help you with basically sorting and classifying your records. So just little examples of other types of technologies that's used to assist in managing records and information. So with the final chapter that gives more detail about the digital documents, were you able to look at that in its entirety?
Yes, I read it, but like some of the terminologies and stuff I'm not too familiar with. It sounds like IT techie-like.
Okay, so
system.
Basically, the definition of a digital document.
Right.
You remember, you have your chapter reading in front of you?
Yes, I have chapter
8.
Chapter 8, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that spoke to the fact that when we talk about a digital document,
right,
how it's created is different. And so it says it's a computer processable record created for purposes that would otherwise be served by paper or photographic record. Okay, right. So the fact that when we talk about a digital document, it can be converted to digital, or it can be what they call born digital. And the book gave some examples of born digital records. You have an example you'd like to share? When we talk about born digital, that means it never existed in a paper format. Okay, so when we talk about born digital, that's those documents. And so by me saying that, what comes to mind when you think of born digital records? What's on your computer that you use to create letters and memos? What's on your computer if you want to do a spreadsheet?
Templates.
What it's called, like you have word processing files, okay? You also have your Excel spreadsheets, your PowerPoints.
Right.
Okay, and so those are things you are creating digitally. So they never existed in the paper format unless you had like a presentation that you decided you would scan in, become a digital document. Okay, so when we talk about born digital, that's what that is all about. The fact that this never existed before in a paper format.
Okay.
So there are advantages to using this, like everything, you have your advantages and your disadvantages. So the important things that you would like to bear in mind in terms of digital documents, basically, they facilitate a lot of our functions in a more efficient way as opposed to doing them in the paper format and having to, then you prepare this document in the paper format and then you got to go and get it signs, like, so if it have 2 or 3 signatures, you have to make sure that goes around. And so with paper, you're limited to 1 person use at a time. Whereas with electronic, you know that multiple persons can have access to the document.
Right.
At the same time, you know, unless you have certain controls that you apply to the document. You know, so based on paper filing systems versus the digital, there's the ease of use and efficiency, okay? And although you basically, from paper to digital, a different environment. However, the rules around them, if you would notice, don't really change. Because even in the electronic format, you're still securing documents much as you would in the physical world, where you would probably have to store them in file cabinets or shelves or locked rooms, etc. You're applying them in the electronic realm, but in a different way, okay? You also denote who has access to them in the physical world. When you had your files, some were just general files that persons could view. Some files had confidential or secret, so you had to handle them differently. So
Right.
when you go into the electronic realm, you don't just drop that. You apply it, but it's just in a different way. Okay, and the digital documents, the benefits are the ease of sharing the information, okay, rather than having to print off so much. If it's 10 pages and physically you have to send that to 10 people, making all those copies. You remember one time
yes, yes.
room was like that. That
Yeah.
engine hub, because if you have to do something that requires so much copies for dispatch, getting them sorted and stapled together and compiled for distribution, and then the messenger have to go and take those out. Now, once that document is finalized, you know, via the email, or if it's something for posting, you can then do that, and it's distributed to a wide audience with much less effort and resources.
And it's faster.
Right. Very much so. Very much so. And so while you have folders and subfolders in predetermined file plan, okay, and that's why the file plan comes, you have to inventory to know what's in your office, what's in your space. Okay, once you do that inventory and you have that discussion on how you need to organize and categorize, okay, then you end up with your documentation in terms of your retention policy. Okay, and then that is what you use going forward to guide your management of all the information that you have identified. So using a digital document or utilizing digital documents all is a part of facilitating that ease of use and retrievability. And also, you know, storing digitally provides a lot of space savings.
Right.
Okay? When you compare the fact that you're storing them digitally, so you need so much space on your hard drives, etc. When you think of what you have to pay for the physical space, you can see the savings and convenience that one would be afforded. So basically, you have various types of systems that help you manage the digital documents. Okay, most common would be something that's called an electronic document management system. So you may have seen the term in the reading, EDMS. And basically you have a lot of vendors out there with this type of product, And so when you're in the market for a product to manage your electronic information, you really have to do a lot of research and, you know, just to make sure that you can get the best fit for what you want to do. So you don't want to get carried away with looking at what they call, quote, the bells and whistles. They may say, oh, this can route documents at this speed, or it may be able to help you with classifying and doing your retention. But unless you test and see how these work, then sometimes, you know, you end up not liking the one that you chose, or you find it's not doing the things you anticipated it would do, you know. So there's a whole process around going out to select electronic solutions to help with the area of records management, okay? Because you have so many different types of electronic tools that help you to manage information in various formats, okay? So good evening, Jada. Good evening, Tichelle. This is we're trying to finish chapter 8 and then spend some time going over the main concepts that we would have discussed during the course of these few weeks. So we're still talking about the digital documents, okay? And like I said, the benefits of the digital document technologies are fast retrieval. You have that online access, okay? The distribution itself is simplified, okay? There's enhanced integrity for the files, okay? You have control in terms of the various versionings that is also there. You can also see improved security and space savings. Okay, so that's like about 7 things that you can attribute to the use of digital document technologies as opposed to the paper filing systems. So that's definitely included, that you can highlight that particular section in terms of all your benefits from digital document technologies. Okay, we talked about fast retrieval in terms of your active records management. Remember now, with your active records, are they something you would want stored off-site? No, because you're referring to them regularly.
Every day, yeah.
Right. You know, some persons may even have a short time frame that they have to be looking back at them. So those records, they definitely need to be near you. And so that quick retrieval is very important for those records that are considered active. You also, in terms of online access, you have your various networks, you have your various access locations, some may be remote, etc. But the ability to quickly share the information with the persons that are what we would call qualified or bona fide recipients in terms of your work team, etc. The online access is very critical. And we all know that definitely COVID was an example, because you weren't allowed to work within your office. And so that accessibility via online access was very important, okay? And it facilitates the, what we call simplified distribution, because what? The procedures are automated. So what we talked about earlier, McDonald, when I said, if you had paper and you had to send copies out to multiple persons, that meant a busy copying room, okay? So that whole distribution process has really been enhanced due to digital documents. File integrity and improved file integrity would come about if you have properly indexed your documents, okay? And basically your systems haven't had any, what we call mishaps in terms of accidental destruction or any malfunctioning of hardware, okay? So once they're properly indexed and stored, there's very little possibility of chances of being lost, okay? And that's a key factor there, that whole process of properly classifying and indexing them. Okay, the documents are not physically removed from files for reference or distribution, which, you know, in the paper world, somebody come and ask for a file and you check it out to them. But what they do, they use it and then they let someone else carry it, and they're not concerned at all as to who carried it or whether they returned it to you or not. So that whole tracking of paper files can be a very frustrating process, you know. But with the distribution of a digital document, okay, they're not physically removed from files, okay? So that whole completeness of the files that's maintained through your index is all a part of keeping that integrity in place. Okay, so that tracking, having to keep tracking who took who of the file, because like we said, a physical file, only one person can use that at a time. Whereas with your digital documents, there, you know, multiple persons can look at the file. Okay, when we talk about the version control, okay, you can apply that effectively with digital documents, because you have the technologies that would allow, as you create a updated version, you know, you save one and then you go back and you make some changes, so that wouldn't be version 1 anymore. Right. So the version control, that's also a benefit of utilizing digital documents. Okay, so document revision histories, you can display that when you go to retrieve. Okay, so superseded, withdrawn, obsolete documents, you would be able to have them identified clearly. Okay, and you can make them inaccessible. You could delete them, okay? Or whoever's the authorized user can notify when these new versions are released. It also lends to improve security. And I say that on one breath, but you know, you also have those risks, because if your persons are not trained around the security process, you know, you can still end up having some issues with your digital document. But it makes security easier to execute. Okay, so digital document technology provides more effective security, let's put it like that, for your proprietary records, meaning those that only you create, and confidential documents. Okay, and you know, we talked about it earlier, documents that have personally identifiable information. Anyone can give me some examples of documents that have personally identifiable information or records? Your health records, okay, financial information.
Yeah, financial.
But if you're with a company that is, what shall I say, like a Wendy's or a McDonald's franchise where the way they make their products is a secret. It's a trade secret, you know, and you don't want that type of information to be released. You have to guard that. That's one of your assets. So things of that nature, you definitely have to have strict controls around that. Password privileges, other types of security measures that are utilized for computer in or what we call digital documents, computer-based security measures for them. So when we have employees that rely on digital documents for reference or other purposes, right? That the volume of those records are reduced and they minimize our exposure in terms of confidential or proprietary information being accessed by unauthorized persons. Okay. So printing digital documents can also be controlled or prohibited, okay? So that's another good factor about the improved security around your digital documents. And we spoke about space savings in the fact that because these records are in electronic format, they don't take up the volume of space needed when you have physical collections and you have to configure an office space with record storage and filing supply equipment. Okay, so the digital image is much smaller. Okay, it occupies less space than paper. Okay, based on the fact that it's made up of character-coded textual documents. Okay, so those digital documents like your word processing files and your email messages, they're basically stored more compactly. Okay, and if you take a note in that chapter, it gives you a clear idea of the volume, okay, because it's referring to the fact that when it would take you,
no baby, come.
like, hello, sorry. Okay, so when we're looking at the filing cabinet space and you're requiring over 160,000 square feet for storage and access, you're basically looking at the ability to have like millions of pages that would fill probably a 4-drawer file cabinet stored right there on your hard drive. So if you were to print them out and have to store them, you get a better appreciation for the amount of savings you would have realized because you're utilizing digital documents. Okay, digital documents, they're not physically handled and they're not subject to that wear and tear. Because you know, in the physical world, if a file is a hot commodity, you know how that file jacket could look.
Yep.
You know, little tear here, little tear there, some of the poor pages all bent on the side and stuff.
Robert is.
Right. So that's a key protection for your files in the digital format. You're reducing that wear and tear caused by the fact that it's an active record and it's in constant use. Okay, so you can also look at the protection in terms of you have a convenient way to back up the copies of those documents. Okay, you can have your backup process for duplication or storing them in the cloud. Okay. You have your network service there, but you can then have those things backed up routinely so that in the event of, like we say, unforeseen disruptions or challenges, your work is still there protected, you know. But doing a physical paper record storage situation can be more intense. Okay, so basically, when we look at documents in the digital format, that critical component is the indexing and retrieval. Because unlike a physical paper, despite the fact that it's a lot of volume, etc., if you have them, if you're properly organized, you can go find that box, go in that box, look through those papers because you're physically looking and reading to see what you can find. However, with digital documents, it's not the same. So you have to classify and index those documents because they're not going to be in a way that you can tangibly do that type of a search as you would for paper records. So in talking about this whole digital document realm, it's telling us that successful implementation and distinctive capabilities of digital document technologies depend on the characteristics and effectiveness of your indexing concepts, okay? And the procedures applied to those collections. So ultimately, if you index poorly, your retrieval, not only in terms of results, but also the time it takes you to retrieve from your digital collection is going to be impaired. It won't be as effective, okay? You primarily may have more errors because the indexing puts in place the necessary information required to go back and retrieve. So it says, while collections of digital documents are often described as database systems that store and retrieve digital documents, actually employ two interrelated databases, a document collection and an index to it. The index is what you search first to look for the pointers to the document, okay? And so when we talk about pointers and indexing parameters, etc., then we get into what we call the file plan, okay? The file plan, or another term for it, basically refers to taxonomy. And it's basically, like we said, a categorization scheme, okay? And documents are grouped pertaining to a given matter. So a file plan would define topical or categories that the documents will be grouped and labeled in an electronic folder, okay? So basically, when you look at where you're storing your records electronically, you're using folders. How many of you're using folders in terms of where you place them? Because basically this is where it's getting in terms of your organization. Are you allowed to determine what is the subject of those folders and how they're organized, or are those folders already set up for you on your various electronic networks, etc.
Some are set up, some are you can set up your own folders, and some are set up already.
Okay. And so based on the fact that they're already set up, who gives you the guidance on what to go where?
Your manager, or who's in charge to tell you what
Okay.
to that folder.
So when persons come in new to the organization, they go through a training process that also entails how to manage the records you create.
Yes, and
That's good.
If it's under your department, we have all the procedures relating to that the department, and those same files you will find the instructions of how it's done.
Okay, so now another challenge in terms of when we do that, in terms of the naming convention. So you tell them how to name the files, etc.
Yeah, in some cases.
Oh, okay.
In some cases.
No, because you could run into a lot of challenge where, especially with dates and applying them onto the files.
Right.
Do you control the formats, like for your dates? Because you have an English style date and you have the US style date. And you know that those months could either be a this month or the next month.
That is weird. Yeah, that is true. The IT departments and your manager determines how it's set up if you're gonna go by date.
Okay, because that impacts how you get your results as well.
Right.
And if you have one department using US and one department using the British style date thing, you're not gonna have that integrity in terms of when you search for information, because the system will be trying to pick it up from a different view. So this whole file plan concept is very important once you're engaging and using digital documents, okay? So developing a suitable file plan has various stages, which they share with us in the chapter, discussing your investigative phase, your prototype phase, your test phase, and making use of this so that when you do apply it, you get, like we said, if you're gonna go fully electronic and you can't put your hands on paper to retrieve it, it could be very frustrating trying to find information electronically if you don't have the right classification and indexing protocols in place. Okay, and there are standards around that as well. Okay, so there's even something to say the date standard. Okay, so if you're using date format, the ISO standard for dates, basically the standard is set up so that you should begin with your year. So the year, if it's 2022, that's 2022, okay? It's followed by 2 digits for your month. So that means if it's June, you don't just put 6, you put 06, okay? And then followed by the day, and today's date is the 30th. So if you were to put a date onto a particular file that you've created or you're using, that date would look like 2022 0630. Okay, and the reason for that is basically when you consistently use that date format and you have a folder where you have a particular type of documents, maybe it's, should we say your client, if you have application thing for clients, maybe your client application, and you include their name and date as part of the protocol, then you can actually get a definite true sort by following that date format. Because, you know, sometimes you end up with some weird things when you try to sort on a date that is maybe with the month first, etc. So you can always, by using the 2 digits, whether it's, if you're in December, well, you don't have to worry, that's 1 and 2. But if you're in one of those months up to like, that'll be up to September, you always use that 0 before your next digit. So it's incorporating those into your date field setup. And all of that helps with being able to sort better and to allow rapid retrieval of the information once it's consistently sorted based on standard best practices. And I will check for the ISO number for that date standard so you can have it for your reference and read up more on it. Not necessarily for the test, but just to inform with regard to us talking about best practices and standards in relation to managing records. Okay. When we talk about the parameters, okay, that is a category of information by which documents will be indexed for retrieval. So the file plan approach is essentially indexing with a single parameter, which may be, like we talked about earlier, it could be the name, a subject heading, a project number, a case file number, or something that's unique to your business. Okay, so that's like one of those things that works to help with the retrieval. Okay, but you know, these can be done in conjunction with other key indexes as well. So the indexing would allow your documents to be categorized by various parameters. It doesn't only have to be one. You know, in some departments, you may refer to a particular document a certain way, and in another department, say like in accounts, maybe they more into the invoicing numbers, etc. Whereas probably in your particular area, you're particularly filing stuff related to the vendor's actual names. Okay, so the index databases, basically, when you look at an index database, you have a number of fields, okay? So those fields are what work or correspond to the parameters that you would have set in terms of your document collection. So you may have key fields as well as non-key fields. Okay, so again, things important to identifying your digital documents would be names, subject, terms, date, case numbers. Okay, all of the ways you can possibly think of retrieving that document. Okay, your fields that basically would not be considered key fields may be more descriptive. Okay, and these terms, or they did give you a list in the book where you can see some of the various types of subject filing systems and fields. Okay, so there's lots and lots of ISO standards in relation to managing your records. So there's information and documentation standards. That's under the ISO 15836. And it talks about metadata, which is what you're looking at or what we're discussing now in terms of being able to ensure the document has been indexed well for easy, quick retrieval, okay? So things like document date, or who created the document, maybe the recipient, subjects, notes, all of those type things. Some may be key fields, some may not be key fields. Okay, so you have various types of data to enter. So after you talk about your subject terms, etc., you have to convert that to a computer processable form so that it's able to be a part of your index database. Okay, and a lot of times with searching, you can have partial searches, etc. But in terms of what's most important at times is being able to do the full text search. Okay, full text search, where you can literally go through the whole document with your specific search criteria. Automatic categorization, that is also available. You have products on the market that assist with that. You can also, for more advanced system, there's even what they call artificial intelligence, to the point that systems are trained in order to, once they're shown, they can routinely categorize the documents for you based on the key criteria that you set. Okay. So you mentioned folders, McDonald. Folders are one of those ways we try to keep our documents organized and not just out there floating around in the digital environment. And so a lot of times you don't want to go too far. You don't want to have so much subfolders that the whole search process becomes even more time consuming. But based on how you have structured your information in your file plan development, it would help so that you can work from like what we call a, now they use it like to say a big bucket approach. So at a high level, you can categorize and then work down into your sub levels, not going beyond, say, maybe 10 folders at the most if you have to. And that's probably in really big companies. But the whole focus around that is to basically work around your functional categories, identify your specific type, similar records within those functions, okay? Analyze any regulatory requirements, any business needs, and come up with the best time frame in terms of retaining those records. Okay, so the chapter also gives some pointers on managing the documents, the digital documents, and that's where we look at the use of technology and the fact that there are different types of technology out there that assist with specific areas of managing records. So if somebody tells you, oh, I have a software that does with all the record keeping capabilities, you just can't take that at face value, because there are software that allow you to do your workflow processes. That's a part of managing the records. There's software that would allow you to deal with managing your privacy components. You have your software that's what we call enterprise content management. That's another type of software affiliated with, or a program affiliated with the records arena. And it basically allows you to manage multiple types of content. So it's not just your straight out Word files. You could have pictures, you could have videos, you could have mixed content stored in one repository as it relates to the records for your area. So when we talk about technologies, we have ECM, we have the document management systems, we have the records management applications. We can also have, like I say, business process software. And so they're all designed on helping to ensure the full management of the record during its life cycle. So maybe for active records, where you want to constantly be able to track them and have access to them, you may be using a document management solution. And once that whole process is finished, when you look at managing your inactive records, then that's probably where you would want to have your records management solution applied, which will then ensure that everything that in that repository remains a record. It's not up to be altered, it's not up to be changed, and it's on track with the retention plan for that specific type of records. So the technology itself can work based on what you needed to do. So before you even engage in getting a technology, it's always important to know what are the final objectives. Okay. So Ms. Grant, Silvera, Merritt, were you all able to go through chapter 8 in terms of saying that this is the final? Well, I also wanted to find out whether you do want to interact again before the test, just to do reviews on the different concepts.
Okay.
Fine with me. Yes, fine with me.
Okay. And so I marked up the papers, but what I'm gonna do is I'll just highlight it, put the grades on them, and send them back through the email. I started by talking in terms of the records management scenario. I like what I got from the general overview of the papers, providing an insight into what was the scenario at your company. And I know some persons were like, well, I couldn't write all of that on that particular topic, or I couldn't in terms of the records life cycle. But remember now, these are all concepts related to records management. So another way that you can also add without it being fluff is basically to explain, when you're talking about that concept, explain that it's connected to records management and what it is, and that tends to get you at least a paragraph or two. Okay, and the fact that you're managing records also means that you have to say what is a record, right? So that helps as well. Okay, so even when we're talking about the technology, we would want to indicate that as well, so that we can say why we would have highlighted a particular technology, you know. And in the book, it covered two basics, but it did mention the electronic document management systems. You know, so it looked at the micrographics, which is not as popular today, but based on knowing what your needs are, it can still be a viable solution in your environment, okay? Because it's basically taking a picture of your records as opposed to the actual digitization. So the digitization process is involving your scanner, whereas with the micrographics, you need your camera equipment, okay? And based on when we look at life cycle and we're looking at various stages, in the beginning, when it's active, you want that online presence. You want to be able to work with it, to route it, okay, to complete your workflow processes through digital, okay? But at the end of the day, if you're in an institution where it's more cost effective for you to do what we call, to have those documents, you're more interested in having those in the photographic format that you can duplicate, and you can have one out for regular use, and then your master copy, you can have that preserved for your business continuity aspect. Then you may make a choice. You may decide to go with the micrographics. And the strength of the micrographics primarily is the fact that it can last for hundreds of years. So depending on the industry you're in the US, in terms of like records that relate to environmental issues, etc., that they consider extremely important in years to come, they weigh that which technology they use to think about it in terms of the challenges with digital. You're going to incur migration costs, okay, because you know that they don't last. The digital media also has its challenges, and so some firms find it more feasible to go with micrographics, where they're assured of hundreds of years of life compared to the shorter lifespan for the digital media. And if you have stuff in digital and you're not really following up and monitoring, you know, you can lose information as well. So that whole program around keeping it preserved can result in your cost benefit analysis swaying more towards using the micrographics. Now, both of them, in terms of getting started and buying equipment, that's a cost as well. Okay, so in the beginning, we would have talked about the business needs for us having to go through this whole process of managing records. So anyone care to share what they have learned so far with regard to why do we have to be concerned about records? Why are records important for us in executing our business functions? What are some of the reasons that would have been highlighted during the time that we have been discussing this whole topic about records management. What are some of those important reasons? You don't have to give me all, and everyone don't have to rush to give a response. But let's hear something so that we know we're on the right track. Well, why are business records so important? Y'all don't do me like last week now. Ain't nobody answer.
I can answer. It goes back to the record keeping principles. That everything
Right.
from that
Okay.
a tip card. That
right. Definitely. That's your ace in the hole.
Key. Yeah.
And that could get you rolling. You could outline them, and then you could discuss each one.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So what are those record keeping principles?
Accounting, transparency, integrity, protection.
Go back to that A. Somebody correct her with that A. She said accounting.
Accountability.
Right. Okay. Definitely.
Accountability.
Right. We need that accountability. And what else? You said?
Transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Protection, compliance, availability, retention, and disposition.
Awesome. Okay, and so you understand each part of that, right? In terms of the reason why we say that. So accountability, meaning that there's somebody in place or in charge to ensure that there's that support, and also accountability down at all levels, okay? Because a user, you're responsible for the records you create, you know, while your manager may have ultimate responsibility for ensuring they are managed the way they should be. Each person has to do their part as well, okay? So definitely that's an important reason, okay? But when we look at the business itself and why they benefit from that, you know, in terms of, we talked about the time and space element, we talk about the cost, we talk about compliance, okay? And the efficiency around the whole concept of records management. So definitely, you can't forget that. And when we talk about a record, anybody care to share? When we talk about a record, what are we talking about? I mean, a lot of things pass our way, but the key thing about a record is it what? Provides evidence. Evidence of what? A transaction, evidence that an important or key decision was authorized or approved. So we want to ensure that we know what is a record so that we can manage it accordingly, and we can manage that from the time it's created to the time we ultimately get rid of it. Okay, and when we think about managing information, the whole concept of what we should do revolve around having systems in place that help us do that. Okay, and one of the things that we really have to do is we have to know what our records are. We have to identify what records we have to have, records we have, and know who owns them and where they are and what type of records they are, Are there any legal or regulatory obligations attached to them? Do we need them as a part of critical operations? Okay, so in order to do that, we have to do certain things. One would be an inventory. The inventory is your fact-finding mission. So that fact-finding mission tells you all the details you need, the nitty-gritty about what you're creating and where it is. Okay, what do you do with that information after you have conducted your inventory? What should you come up with?
A retention schedule.
Right, and that retention schedule also would entail having a file plan. Okay, so that you know how those records are going to be arranged, and then you can attach the retention timeframes accordingly.
Correct.
Okay, so you know those are your tools. You can't talk records management if you haven't done an inventory and you don't have a file plan and you don't have a retention schedule. That's your foundation right there. Okay, and that's the foundation that helps to build and elevate the rest of the framework for governance of the information in your organization. Because once you know what you have and where it is and the responsibilities attached, you can then put in place adequate policies and procedures around the processes. Okay, so when sometimes you hear that's why I think I gave you something too that talked about the difference between records management and information governance. You have to have records management first to apply information governance. Okay, so that foundation comes from knowing what you have and where it is and how it's used, all those nuggets, so that you can then put in place the policies, procedures, etc., security around that information. And that's your governance right there. So your governance is like the overarching umbrella for managing information. And records management, it's right at the foundation, at the core, where you have your users and persons generating or creating information. So the records and information are corporate assets, and they're vital in order to provide evidence of our actions and decision and support accountability and transparency. Well, it also helps us to comply with our regulatory obligations. So that's including stuff like employment, we have contracts, labor contracts, we have financial laws, okay? We have laws to protect data. We have laws relation to access to information, which the Bahamas hasn't rolled out as yet, but it's here, it's been approved, Freedom of Information Act, okay, to support our decision-making and protect the interests of our staff and other stakeholders. So being, what shall I say, compliant, information management compliant makes it easier for staff or employees to carry out their functions, because they would then be able to find the information they need whenever it's needed. And the saying is the right record for the right person at the right time. Okay, and we all know what happens when you don't get the information you need. Okay, it's frustrating. And so we want to do all of that to ensure the information can be found quickly and easily. And so all that process in the beginning about inventorying and making sure we index the documents, etc., all of that feed and tie into making sure the information can be found quickly and easily, okay? The whole records management concept, we talk about the space savings, okay? And space savings, not only in terms of the fact that you no longer, if you're converting to digital, you don't have to worry about the bulky cabinets and filing equipment, but you're also routinely managing the information. So you have retention attached, which means that as the retention time frame expires on the record, you're routinely able to what? Dispose of them, okay? So you're not keeping or you're not over retaining the information, okay? And then the money savings or the cost savings would come from your reduction primarily in your storage and maintenance costs, okay? With the program in place, you can then be more compliant, okay? By having the documentation that you need to fulfill your legal and regulatory requirements. Okay, your efficiencies would be improved due to your accessibility or your ease of accessibility to the information you need. Okay, you also are ensuring in this whole process that what we call our vital information that really puts you back on your feet in terms of during crisis or any natural disasters or unplanned disruptions, that information is protected, it's stored, and can be drawn upon in those times. Quality of your information definitely would be enhanced, and you'd be able to provide staff, like I say, with access to what we call accurate and reliable information. They don't have to be guessing if it's a draft or this version that they sent out is not the current version. Okay, security around confidential information is also much easier. And the risk management capabilities are enhanced. So those primarily, in a nutshell, really summarize your effective records management tips. Any comments for that section of it? Hello? Okay. When we talk about things that we should be employing or engaging based on these various chapters that we've gone through, managing the information should entail arranging records systematically. Okay, so there has to be some training around that as well. There has to be an adoption of how you're going to proceed that's standardized, and everyone isn't doing their own thing, because it only takes one person to go with another format, and that pretty much cuts off your accessibility to maybe a key document because they have put it as a different subject or indexed it differently than what you would have shared as the person responsible for records management. Papers or files, primarily, you want to make sure they're properly labeled. Consistency in your documents and folders in terms of that whole process, okay? And you want to make sure there's a distinction between your active and inactive. All of that to do with managing the life cycle. You know that the active, there needs to be that distinction because they're the records you're going to be needing on a daily basis. So it's very important that you know where they are, what access controls revolve around them, etc. Okay, and maintenance means you're not just setting it and it's one and done. There has to be a process in place for you to go and routinely check, maybe do a follow-up with regard to applicability of your retention timeframes or the types of records in case something has changed and there are new types of information being created by your organization. So you really want to ensure you're familiar with how long to keep your major categories of records. Okay, so your retention schedule, that goes hand in hand. That's your ultimate tool to organize the rest of your activities. Okay, and retention is to be applied across the board. If you remember, those were some thick chapters in terms of doing the inventory and also the information for the retention. Okay, because despite the format, if you have a retention schedule, you have a copy in paper, you have it electronically, and you have it on some other recording device, etc. That retention stipulates that that particular record, although it's on 3 different medias, once the time is up, you have to ensure that is removed from all. Okay, and when retention isn't applied consistently, that's where organizations get into problems, because should you end up in some type of a litigation matter, or you have legal challenges or issues, once that record falls within the scope of what's being requested, you cannot touch, delete, alter anything. Okay, and so if you have not been following it and you only needed that record for say 5 years and you kept it for 20, and then somebody comes and swings you with a lawsuit, you destroyed it, maybe in the paper, but you still have it in the electronic, it still has to be produced. And that could be the smoking gun for causing you to, lose your case or, put your reputation on the line. So consistency and really being in compliance with any legislation that impacts your industry is very important, because at the end of the day, that is what provides the defense for you. Okay, if you're only required to use it for your business for X amount of time, then routinely ensure that you are doing your due diligence with its disposition. Okay. In terms of legislation, like I would have indicated before, there isn't a national framework with regard to managing records or information. But the government has in place the archives that's responsible for management of government information. Okay, and so that they have an institution that's set up and in place for facilitating the storage, okay, of government records that are inactive and have historical value or may not have expired. So ideally how it should work, basically government agencies within their specific realm of duties, etc., should be routinely sending inactive records to the archives. Now the problem comes in if they have a retention schedule, but that was around for years and it hasn't been updated, okay? or if they are not being guided by their retention schedule. So what that means is that you end up keeping everything. Okay, and you could imagine why there wouldn't be space to hold. Okay, there's a very small percentage of records that bubble up to the realm of historical information. And given the fact that the archives is responsible for information of that sort, primarily they would be able to identify quite quickly, because they're trained in identification of those types of documents with archival value. So even if they send them and they're reviewed, whatever is not needed, then the ministry would then have to send the requisite authorization and they can be destroyed. But if that process is not moving the way it should, then you can see why there would be a buildup, or you can see why we would end up with cases where there's mismanagement of government records and information, and actually destroying government records, which we should say unauthorized destruction, that's criminal. You know, in private sector, you're basically you're not subject to having to send things to the public archives. But if there are documents of a historical nature within your company, you know that it's in the power of the archivist to basically seek to preserve and get custody of those. So privately, we do records management because it's important for the business. It has its business benefits, and it provides us with that degree of accountability and reliability, et cetera, that's needed to ensure business is done the way it should be. And business can be done because we have the available information. So anyone want to give me the definition of what is a record? In your words, we don't have to go word for word or whatever. You could go a simple, okay? So I'm just gonna throw it out there, a simple one. It's anything that's created or received by your organization in the course of conducting business. That's a simple, basic, flat out definition. We have the ISO definition, and we have a definition that would have been given in your text as well. But in a nutshell, it's anything that's created or received by your organization in the course of conducting its business. So you can have records. Is it only limited to paper? No, of course not. You can have your electronic records, electronic in the sense that, you know, nowadays you'll have a lot of different devices and things you may be recording stuff on. You can also have it in terms of audio tapes or videotapes, you know, and that's in addition to the paper and besides the digital, okay? For persons who would have been around a while before digital really caught on, the microfilm is still their go-to source. My ladies in the, what do we call that? The credit union. Jada, do y'all have microfilm records? Can you hear me, McDonald? Because I don't see demerit.
Yeah, I can hear you quite well.
Oh, okay. So I don't know, maybe demerit just popped back in. Diane, can you hear me? It looks like she's having some issues.
That was me last week.
Deanne, you're in now. Were you able to, I saw you dropped off, right? She's still not. Okay, so that's a basic definition of the record. And what other things should we talk about when we're asked to discuss records? Okay, the definition, what the fact that records can be on various medias. Okay, there's another important fact. It could be a temporary record, okay, or it can be a permanent record, or it could be what? A non-record. And when we say non-record, they're transitory. You only need them for the information they provide you with at that time. Okay, so that's all points that you can do in relation to a record. Okay, when we look at, I think I had a presenter last week in terms of the vital records, but I didn't get any feedback to know whether you had questions, whether you understood it. Did it have any relevance for you? I didn't get any response. So at this time, because definitely there would be mention of vital records with regard to your exam. So persons need to understand basically what's a vital record and why is it important. So our friend, Miss Gail, shared with us her experience having to go through that storm and the whole process that was involved. Although they had a plan, what she was basically trying to say is sometimes if you're not testing that plan, there's some things that are going to be missed. So in showing us what happened, you're not thinking that you're going to have to engage person at a level with regard to biohazard, but they had to because the flooding came with water that had so many different mixtures in it. It had oil, there was a chicken or some type of a poultry, some type of a farm, what have you. So that the food from that. Also, there was other contaminants like I think in terms of wet records and mold. Okay, and she explained a lot about the process of trying to salvage and save. Okay, so for them, because they had records that were wet, they had to engage vendors who could freeze, dry, and restore the records. Okay, they had to find vendors to actually give them keys into the office because, you know, moving on up meant all your swiping, etc. But nobody really thought about what if one day something goes down or the system's off or no electricity, how do we get access to the doors? Okay, yeah, they were swiping and they had the keys protected, but the room, they couldn't get into the room because what? The swipe doors didn't being damaged, you couldn't get in. You know, so it just showed a lot of things that I also provided you with her checklist. Everyone got that? In terms of some things when you're considering developing a program, what all you need to look at setting up or providing. Did anyone take a glance at that handout?
Yes, I did. It's quite lengthy.
Okay, and that's to tell you, do your company have like a plan for what we call business continuity?
Yes, we do. We have a department specifically for that.
Right, so that type of information in relation to what they're doing to manage your vital records and what would have to be engaged. Now it would basically have to be tailored because of the type of environment you know. So if some people may be in environments where they have tornadoes, etc., so some of their requirements may differ from someone in an area where it's more flooding. So you're more into making sure that your space is protected. If it means having sandbags against the door for the flooding, etc. And that primarily basically would encompass those things for prevention, but then you have to recover. And what she primarily shared with us was the vastness of having to do so much to recover from that type of a storm. So our Vital Records, also it's a program. It's under the domain of records management in terms of getting a program set up to identify. So you would similarly kill two birds with one stone by ensuring when you go out and do your inventory and collect your information, if you're doing a survey or any questionnaires or personal interview, you're asking as you go through the types of records, is this a vital record? Okay, and you should be explaining to the person what you mean by vital, because when you say vital, yeah, they're thinking, oh yeah, I need to have this. They're thinking of operating in the normal circumstances and being able to go to this and go to that. But vital is more records for those critical processes. And your department may not be one that has to be up and running right away, very quickly, okay? But when you do come online, you need to have access to specific ABC document in order to begin your processes again, okay? Or due to the nature of your work, people, you're like you're like a repository of information that you have clients from the outside coming to get, okay? So in a time of crisis, you wanna make sure your collection is secure. No, and so that has to be identified as vital, but the priority level would change because it isn't that you have to get it right away, but you want to have that preserved so that once things come back to normal, okay, you haven't lost it. And if it's of a historical nature, you have it to share into the future. Okay, and generally, the vital records specify how your agency will operate in terms of a disaster or an emergency. And they are absolutely necessary for the continued operations, okay? They're needed because they protect legal and financial rights, okay? So that could be legal and financial rights for your institution and as well as your employees, okay? And basically, in terms of what I just said about some people wanting to just say everything is vital for them, there should be no more than about maybe 7% of your records at the most that you can really account to and say vital, because it's uniquely created by us. And in the event something goes down and we have to restart, I need this document, and that, and we're good to go. Because there's information in the course of your business dealings that you can get from other sources. You're not the one that's creating that information. You probably use it for reference or work with it, you know? So that wouldn't be something that you would consider vital for you, okay? And format doesn't matter. You can have vital in paper or electronic format, okay? And your emergency operations records, basically, you must be able to access them right away, okay? And in terms of if your systems go down, you have to be able to restart somewhere else. So those type of records would be critical to you. So in terms of some types of what we would call emergency operating records, that could be your staff contracts and assignment information. Okay, address, phone, contact, you know, if anything happens, you need to be able to still connect with the staff. So definitely your staff contact register, okay? Anything in relation to policy or procedures or systems manuals, okay? If you have something happens, you have to buy or purchase supplies that would be needed to bring you back to normalcy. So who's authorized to do that with your card? Okay, you need to know who can make the purchases for the company. Okay. In your electronic format, you best website and emails that provide a way to communicate and connect with your employees and your customers. So you need to have your website and email access available for your alternate location and your database with your emergency contact information, like I said, for all your staff. Your rights and interest records could be your payroll and accounts receivable, okay, any retirement information, okay, anything to do with safety, public to safety, okay, titles, deeds, and contracts, any licenses and long-term permits that relate to your business, okay. You have regulations and guidance that may apply in terms of how you respond, circulars that may be issued. You know, we have emergency agencies like NEMA, et cetera. So you'd want to make sure communication protocols are in order. Okay, so you need clear authority on those policies, procedures, and also somebody who is definitely responsible for ensuring the process with vital records goes through. Okay, because you know the risk you would be exposed to in terms of your documents being lost. Okay, if you have major destructions to your buildings and you can't access them. Okay, if not only your area is impacted, but it's also at a national level. Okay. And basically, all of this is why your input is very important as a part of your team that deals with your business continuity, because there has to be something in place that speaks to what about the records. And with the storms and the pandemic, and fires, etc. We've had stories in the past where we've had school fires, and so that meant what? Important records, people transcripts, they're permanent records, you know. You may not necessarily go to them every day, but you would want to know if you're engaging in some higher level of education, etc., and you need to provide proof that you've done this or that, you're going to go to that institution for that record. You may have been given a copy, you may have lost it, but ultimately they own those records, and you look to them as the reference that you can go back to. So in their business environment, those records for their students would be vital. Okay. Anyone care to share anything that they think at this time based on their operations would consider a record that's vital and could really make or break them in the event of a disaster and they can't get to them? Credit union. Okay, so you basically, when you're dealing with vital records, you kind of still have to do that inventory just to make sure, like everything else. That's why I say 2 birds with 1 stone. So you pretty much can get your base inventory, knowing what all you have, okay? But asking in that first inventory for indications on what is a vital record so that you can then refine that inventory list to focus on those vital records and basically confirm and develop a vital records program for them. Okay, in terms of records, do we have any, one thing, email. Is email a record? Any response?
It is.
Okay, depending on what? Your content, you know, so you could have a transitory email where you're just passing on information about the staff meeting, about the Christmas party, about the death of an employee, okay? But when you start to use the email to convey information as it relates to strategic goals or corporate policies, etc., then you now have a record on your hand. And that record, you know, McDonald, you all have limits with regard to or how staff can use the email in terms of size, I mean size restrictions, or how do you all monitor and manage your emails on behalf of your staff?
IT, I think IT would specifically deal with that, but I know there's no limit as far as I know.
On size, so you could, if you came to that company and you had emails, so you've been to that company like 30 years, they allow you to keep all them emails?
No, they go in archive after like a year or 2.
Okay, so they archive them.
But you can retrieve them.
Right. Right. Okay, and so in that vein, basically there's still persons that find a way around it anyhow. But the main thing is that if it's an email that bubbles up to the level of a record, something that's documented in terms of to be kept on your retention plan, you need to then save that email. Anyone usually does that? In terms of you have that email, it has, it's referring to policy related matters and stuff like that, or it's an email confirming or authorizing. You would basically do a file save as and put that in the relevant folder where you would have those documents. Rather than leaving it in your email box, because then if your IT team says after 30 days, they're removing the documents from your inbox right then, well, you could still have access to it if they have that. But some IT teams may not really engage in archive software. So they may just have a flat out policy that they only hold your emails for the 30 days. And after that, they do clean up. Because like I say, that means you're building up storage that has to be managed. So once you know what are records for your company, then the ideal thing to do is once you get them, you save them, file, save as, and you put it in the relevant folder, subject folder, so that it's not just left in your out. And it's a problem because with email, it's so quick to send messages, and plus you have your spammers and all of that, you know.
Yes.
So if you don't do a routine, set up some rules too. You could do that and help you to manage it so you don't miss the important emails that are what we call records.
Records,
okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so program records and administrative records, there are some types of records. Your administrative records, remember in the section about the schedules, they talked about general schedules, okay, as well as your functional schedules. So general schedules refer to those records that are found throughout the organization. And they would fall into the category of your administrative records because they, on a daily basis, they support activities that keep the organization going. So you may have payroll records, you could have your travel voucher records if it relates to training or business related meetings, etc. Time sheets. You may have folders, although personnel is directly under the purview of HR. If you're in an organization where you have different units, you know, the manager has to sign off on vacation forms for individuals. So within that department, you know, you could probably have copies of that record floating around in there when they approved it, because it's, like I say, for just keeping things functional and knowing who will be out when. But is that department ultimately responsible for retaining that record for the full lifetime of it? You're not HR, so at the end of the day, you're only using that record as a reference. Okay, so for reference purposes, and why that is being played out so much now is because of the privacy laws that are coming on stream, you know, and the fact that you have to protect personal information. So definitely you can use it as a reference, and when it's no longer needed, you haven't acted on it, then it should be destroyed. Okay, if it's to be kept for 5 years, that record is an HR record. So once you've signed off and it goes back to HR, they're the persons responsible for keeping it. Okay. So we talked about the fact that laws basically impact records management, and we may not have as much as the US, but we do have, within the context of various legislations, record keeping responsibilities. Okay. So in terms of what is the business reason for records, what are records, what are some of the tools we have to use to manage them, what records are absolutely vital for us, etc. Any key points that you feel we need to, seeing that we have some more time, go through? Any concept per se, because I know chapters, that's chapters 2 and 3, gave a lot of details about the inventory and the retention schedule. Okay, but in a program, in a records management program, to have the ability to get one up and going, you need your executive sponsorship, definitely. Okay, so there has to be somebody in management willing to give you, to have your back. Okay, and then you basically have to ensure you develop that policy. Okay, that stipulates what are the goals and objectives, what are the responsibilities, if there's any sanctions. Also provide some type of a glossary in terms of the terms that are being mentioned. So that's basically another important component besides just doing inventories. We have to have policy. We have to have a policy. We have to have an executive sponsor. Okay, and then you have to develop your roadmap so that you have time frames and key goals to reach. Okay, and awareness. That's so important for records management. Do any of you guys have anything ongoing? Actually, do you have a actual, everyone here just has like maybe a person that's responsible for records management, or you have a small core team, or is it incorporated in compliance? How are you situated with regard to having that focus for you to say, yes, these are some of the things that are necessary to ensure we're in line with generally accepted record principles. So pretty much for most of you, it's a function, but it's not elevated to the level where you actually have a full program within the organization. You have somebody that may be assigned duties related to it. I read through the scenarios, okay, and I got outlines from persons that would have indicated what they have in respect to equipment and staff to do what they would refer to as probably getting records digitized for those who are in the hybrid mode. Okay, but the sanction has to be there, or sometimes it can be very frustrating if you're trying to achieve this end and nobody has your back. So at the end of the day, if something goes awry, you have nobody to stand up and say, yes, this, especially when it comes to disposition. You definitely, because you need to ensure that it's documented, that these records exist, these records are authorized for destruction, etc.
Well, our department organization is so huge. Mm-hmm. But what happens is we have...
You're a multinational. I mean, you have companies outside of the Bahamas as well, right?
No. Deltec, we just, not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
Not that I know of, but I mean, in the Bahamas, we have so many departments. Mm-hmm. It's so huge. So what happens, everybody has an assigned person to take care of their filing and of their record, example, HR. But at the end of the day, the data management department, which is my department.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. The data management department, which is my department, everybody have to send their files to us for archiving at the end of the day.
Okay.
So even though everybody's responsible for their own filing and record, they still, for the archiving, it's through data management.
Okay.
And
because,
then we would make determination for the destruction and everything from there.
Okay, so the thing is, you have documented, you have a policy or something, right?
Yes.
That's very important.
Yes.
To show authorization.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at. Even if you don't, because sometimes there's, in terms of resources, there's no luxury to have like a big staff. So your awareness and your ability to have a representative in the various areas,
right,
to help execute is key.
Yes, yes, I do. We do have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the environment of financial records and information, you know, we as a jurisdiction, we've been going through a lot.
Yes.
So proper record keeping is imperative to ensure, you know, in terms of reputational damage, we don't really, So that's why it's important that there is, you know, a definite focus on that, because we're talking about compliance with regard to the legislation, etc. But there's also to be compliance in terms of, because actually for those who do set up a unit, primarily that unit, once they've done the groundwork in terms of the inventory and assessments, and they know what corporate information exists, their role then is like monitoring and doing little mini audits to ensure departments are compliant with those policies and procedures, you know? So the tough part is the initial acknowledgement and setup of the framework. Okay. Yeah, so we can't really say how much, because a lot of times it's like a background thing, and there's the misconception, because when you hear the term, basically persons are only equating it to taking records and filing them. And it involves much more. So any questions? Okay, I have to check with Mr. Pratt just to confirm. I think it's a Saturday. Did you get any confirmation for that? I just have to make sure I'm telling you I don't want to tell you the date just yet until I've confirmed, but it's usually the week after, and it would be in person. So you would have to come to the facility. Yeah. Okay, but in the meantime, I will utilize the chat to share content that could help with the studies. And if there are any further questions around those topics that we would have covered, you can feel free to post them and I will respond up until the time. And the exam, like I say, it's part multiple choice, but then you would have a choice of 2 essays.
Oh, 2 essays. Okay. And how many words?
I think in terms, you mean in terms of the length?
Yeah, still
It's still about around the same like we would have for the class assignments.
Okay, wonderful.
I don't recall doing it any longer than that. But
Okay.
based on what was turned in, like I said, they had the basic information. It's just that we could have expounded it a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I send the paperback, I'm sending it via email because I'll just highlight the field and
Right.
I'll put in the points that you could include.
Okay.
You know? So just reading over your essays and just trying to develop them more, that's definitely a good study trend.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
You know, so with the quizzing, I think Jada was the top scorer. Yeah, but basically they was there. I don't have the paper in front of me, but at the time when I was looking at them, there were one or two questions that everybody got right. So I know that was it. So what I'll do is I'll put in the chat
right
that those questions that nobody had an issue with, they got it straight off the bat. You know, but there were one or two questions that seemed to stump some persons. So I'll answer that as well. But like I say, the whole notion of records management is for increase the efficiency of operations, and also you want to be able to protect rights and interests of internal and external customers. You want to ensure that in the event of any disruptions or disasters, you're able to resume operations. You haven't lost your key records that you need. Okay, it also helps with cost efficiencies, etc. It also helps to facilitate greater security and protection around your sensitive records. You know, so it is there, it is important. It may not be recognized to that degree, but without it, you would definitely know that how could you do your business without the records?
That's right. You need those.
That's why you're doing business, based on those transactions, those applications that come in, those inquiries. Okay. So hopefully I trust it would have shed some light on the importance of the profession in terms of ensuring that we can do business in an effective way and also provide that degree of security and protection for those records that require it. And some of the records, like we said, in addition to people's personal records, you know, you have records with health information, you have records that relate to environmental condition, etc. You know, so there's a whole depth around managing information because of the various medias, etc. But the whole purpose is right record to the right person at the right time. And so with that, I will come to the site and just make sure you're all comfortable. I don't think anyone should, based on the readings. And like I say, I'm available up until the time for the exam. Principles, the reasons why we do it. Technology in itself, it's a tool. So to know what your tools are, besides the technology, because you could have the most expensive technology in the world and it still won't get you the optimum results if you don't know what you need, you know. So that's important. It's a technology now. We're more moving into the digital realm. And like I said, we're moving into a different environment, but we still need those basic key controls. Okay, they just look different because of the environment. Okay, so you still had a special area for your physical stuff to be stored. You still had a procedure to organize them and put them. You didn't just take a document and put it in a folder and just put it in any file cabinet. There was a outline, a set area for certain types of files. Okay, there were specific personnel assigned to handle maybe only your confidential files. So just keep that in mind when you think of organizing information electronically. There still has to be that realm, although you're in this space where everything's just out there. If you don't organize it, you won't be able to get at it. You won't be able to retrieve it. And so records management is just making sure the management aspect continues at all the various stages, okay? So when you look even at records life cycle, sometimes you may see a very simple one that just talk about create and receive, use, store, dispose. Some like more in depth or in detail because they're looking at it electronically and the fact that when you create it or receive it, you have to distribute it, okay? And that distribution could come through your workflow assignments, etc. Okay, and then that information is then used, okay? And once it's no longer in use, you have to store it, and in storing it, it has to be protected, you know? So it's just that routine flow of what happens to the information once it's received and it's deemed a record. And so being able to understand record from non-record, that's important, okay? Because that then tells you what you have to look at, what you have to address. And so remember that highlights, not really a highlight, but the little handout I shared where you could ask certain questions. And if the answer is yes, then it's a record. Everyone got that, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So all of those help you to expound on your essays if you have to write about what is a record and you give your definition. Once you give your definition, you can incorporate those pertinent questions that address a record. And then you could have a section to speak about your non-records and then wrap up. You know, or if you get a question related to what is records management and you define it, you can mention about which standards apply. You can definitely use your ISO 15489 as that's the key or the core one that's used. And when we talk about practices, business practices, your principles, okay? So you don't have to muddy the waters and get all in fluff. Focus on that one set concept, define. You can give your advantage and disadvantage if it warrants that, okay? And then you can wrap up, you know, to make sure you give your details on what it is, make sure it's defined, it's clear, and give your examples, your benefits, or your disadvantages. In some instances, there are some disadvantages to using digital versus paper, just as well as there are lots of advantages in being digital because of the fact that time sensitiveness means we want it when we want it. You know, a lot of people can't wait any longer. So you would have put them back in a paper-based setting, they would go crazy. But the progress comes with its challenges. So it was great for the time we had, the short time we had, interacting with you guys. I'm here if persons want to, and McDonald, I saw you signed up for something.
Yes, I did.
A newsletter, and that's with one of those vendors. They have good products.
Yeah, Tab. I'm waiting to see what it looks like so I can start saving them and making my library.
Now, also they don't have any sessions going on now, but I don't know if I provided you with the link for the Records Management University. And they usually have timely topics. They go in a session and you end up getting a certificate for your time. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you would get, like, depending on what topic they cover, but that's a good resource. They even have like a community site. So if you have a particular issue that it presents itself, you could post it in the chat, and persons with experience and knowledge and when I'm talking about experience, vast years of experience, they respond to you, and you get good tips, you get great tips, you get links. There's also Iron Mountain info go-to.
Oh, wow.
They have lots of articles on all types of record scenarios and information management. So I'll make sure you get those links as well. Okay. For future reference.
Yes.
If persons are interested in any type of certification, I can also provide you with that information as well. We have the information professional that's done by an association called AIM, Association of Intelligent Information Management. If you're into governance, information governance, ARMA International has a program for that. And basically that would encompass the frameworks to develop an information governance program, of which records management is a subset. Remember that records management, you start off with the foundational things in identifying and knowing the records that your organization creates. And the information governance program pretty much is the umbrella because it links some of the other collaborating units that goes along with developing your policies and procedures and processes. So there's more to it than meets the eye here locally. And so that's what I just try and reach out to persons. You can get involved in the association as well. There's membership fees that if your company is serious about really going to the next level with it, they can pay for membership of the key staff. They have conferences that you can go to and directly interact. And like I say, meet people, find solution to your problems, etc. So I'm just a conduit and I'm just passing on the information. And if there's something in it for you, I say go for it, you know.
Knowledge is power,
yes. And this, there's a tendency for persons in this profession to morph into numerous areas. So you have persons, once they get the concept and the basics, they love compliance, they stick with compliance. You have some people who probably develop more onto publish, because the distinction between the records management and library science is the fact that records management is dealing with non-published information. That's information within your companies, your organizations, your private institutions. Whereas with libraries, they are responsible for published information. So,
right.
Right. So if I didn't mention that, I just did.
Yeah.
So some people tend to lump everything together, but you have so many different facets or fields of discipline within the information management realm. You have persons who take specifically into the technology. So they're those persons who can give you that up-to-date guidance and in terms of scanning your records in, you know, the technical issues, what type of scanner, etc. You have persons who focus more on maybe the preservation, okay? So it's not as confining as you think. So anyway, ladies, take care and we'll all get through this next week and y'all will be able to celebrate and have your summer without having to sacrifice Thursdays to listen to this lady talking about rackets. So anyway,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, y'all take care. And like I said, I'll begin to filter the information that you can use for your review.
Okay.
And yeah, don't just throw down those essays. You know, I'll send you the pointers and you work on develop them, include them in part of your studies. So you know, for all of them, you have to know definitions. You have to understand the concept. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And that's about it. What is the inventory? Where does the inventory fit? Is that the final thing you do? What about the retention schedule? Where does that come in? What about the policy? Okay. You can't have your you can't be doing an inventory if you don't have a policy to outline and show that you have support for the initiative or the project. Yeah. You know, so just understanding those things, all good points for your essay of choice. You know, make sure you can define terms. So good night, everyone. Take care.
Okay. Good night and thank you.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.